So as a youngster, he did travel a lot. He did go to college, first in California, then in Utah, ending up with a major in English. Since then, he has lived in Colorado. He is married and has 4 children. He first published his newspaper article at the age of 14, and now has written over 1,000 articles. And about half of his work time is spent actually writing, and then the rest is spent on research, answering emails, and even marketing. When writing, he often starts at 6 a.m., so he does not waste time. He is definitely a Christian author. That is the worldview you'll see reflected in his stories. And that doesn't mean he writes religious books, but that you'll see spiritual and theological life issues included, not glossed over. So the genre labels that fit his books might be actions or suspense, but you'll have to decide for yourself. So I could say more, but I'm sure that you would rather hear him. So please give a TKA welcome for Mr. Liparulo.
And they kept bugging me about writing novels. And so finally I started a novel because I wanted to be able to tell them that I had and not keep telling them no, I hadn't. So my first novel comes a Horseman, and it's about a serial killer, and he kind of turns the tables on the FBI agents who are after him, and then they have to kind of contend with their own threat of being killed by the serial killer. I brought along some alternative covers that we considered, because it's just kind of fun to look at some of the things that we were looking at the time. It does have a slightly religious element to it. Comes a Horseman actually refers to the horseman of the apocalypse. And by the end of the book, we realize that the serial killer is actually working for somebody who is trying to fulfill prophecy as it relates to the Antichrist. So because of the religious elements, they suggested this cover, and that just didn't fly. But it also is a thriller, and they thought this was more thriller looking, so we did that one. Then they did that one. That one's kind of looks like, I don't know if you can really see the colors on the screen like that, but it's very Halloween looking, so we decided not to do that. And then we chose this one, and this is the cover without the endorsement that they put on the bottom. A friend of mine, the one who actually suggested that I write this novel, is David Morrell. He wrote all the Rambo stories, and so we put his endorsement of the book on the cover, so that's the cover. Now, while I was writing this book, I was about maybe a quarter of the way into it, and I knew that I wanted to have my faith reflected in my stories, but I didn't want it to be kind of a sermon on paper. I didn't want it to be the kind of stories that really, around the time I was writing this, I was also reviewing books for New Man magazine, and a lot of the Christian fiction of the time sounded like a sermon that somebody had just put a book cover on. And I didn't want that. What I really wanted is I wanted the kind of book that I like to read, which was a lot of action, adventure, suspense, without the stuff that offended me as a Christian. So I wanted to have kind of the thrills without the garbage that a lot of the mainstream writers would put in their stories. So I stopped writing for about a month and just prayed the whole time. Just prayed for how to put my faith into the story without making the story feel like a sermon. And this is Pikes Peak, and this is pretty much what you saw out my bedroom window. And while I was praying, I had the sense that God wanted me to look at this mountain, and I felt him just ask me if I saw him in this mountain. And of course I do. I see him in all nature. But really the sense I got was, do I see him literally in the mountain? Either his face or his name written on the mountain. And of course, no, I didn't actually see the literal God or Yahweh or however you want to put it on the mountain. And what I felt was he wanted me to write like that. To write with him in the story without being literally in the story. And I took that to mean write the story that was on my heart and not worry too much about getting God in there, that he would get himself in there better than I could get him in there. And even though it's a crazy story, with the serial killings and the police procedural, and it did really well in Main Street bookstores, it's amazing how many emails I received from people who said, God spoke to me in this scene or that scene. And if you read the scenes that they're referring to, you'd never think that they would get anything religious or faith-based from those scenes. They're beheadings, and shooting up and car explosions, and they're talking about finding God through these scenes. And I just realized then that God did put himself into the story in ways that I could not have dreamed of putting him in there. So I kept writing that way for a number of years, and I ultimately did start edging closer to more of an overt type of faith writing. But the next book was Germ, video games, and then also they have a shield that they can put over soldiers' helmets. And what the shield is supposed to do, and it started out as being kind of a targeting shield, so you have kind of heads-up display where you can target people. what they're also doing, and they're still doing this now, is they're changing what the soldier sees through the shield to represent the best target. So we know, for example, that soldiers would rather shoot at men versus women, and they would rather shoot at adults versus children. They'd rather shoot at people who look different from them than people who look like them. So what these shields do is they change what the soldier sees to the person that would be the most likely target for that particular soldier. So, and I wanted to kind of explore the whole idea of using technology to that level, and kind of making killing machines, you know, to the point that you've got people running around with guns shooting at things and they don't even know what they're shooting at. So the blue blood is supposed to represent the way that shields change things through it, so that the soldier's looking at something different. And it actually does change the color of the blood. You know how in video games you can change how much blood there is or how much gore there is? It's kind of like that in these shields. But I thought it looked like alien blood, so I decided not to do that. And this is the closest to one that we came up with. And there's a couple others that we tried. And then this one, I liked the way the blood drop was coming down, but I didn't like the color. And I started making so many changes that they went back to this and sent me this. And so they were essentially saying, if you keep telling us what to change, we're going to go with this one. So finally I just said, all right, let's throw the drop of blood on that cover, make it red, and I'm happy. And so that's how they did it. And that's the final version. Now after that, I mentioned that a lot of high schoolers were reading Germ and also comes to Horseman. And I started talking to high schoolers and middle schools, and really found that I enjoyed it. I like this age group, mostly because when I talk to adults, they're more interested in who my agent is and who my publisher is and how much money I make and kind of the business of writing. And what I found in younger people is you're more interested in the story. You care about why a character does something in the story as opposed to why I wrote a story, for example. My publisher, right about this time, my publisher called Dreamhouse Kings. That's the first book in the Dreamhouse Kings series, House of Dark Shadows. And probably this was a very successful series, probably because of R.L. Stine. He got behind it. You know R.L. Stine, the Goosebumps guy? There's a picture of me in R.L. Stine. So he recommended it to his readers, and he has millions of readers. So that really gave me a heads up or a leg up on succeeding in Dreamhouse Kings. This is the second book in the series, and I actually wrote the first and the second book together. So the first two came out at the same time. Anybody here reading this book, or well, I'll tell you a little bit about the story. It's about a family who moves from Southern California to Northern California, and they find an old, kind of dilapidated house. And the family consists of mom and dad, little sister Victoria, who's 9, David, who's 12, and Xander, who's 15. And they're kind of exploring the house, so they pretty much know the house. The house started out being very strange. Just sounds are kind of carried oddly through the hallways, and if somebody is talking over here, it sounds like they're talking over there. Footsteps sound like they're coming from over here, they're really coming from over there. When I first wrote it, I had even the kind of the dimensional changes, where people would walk in a room and come out from some other room, or they would walk into a room that they could see as a room, and they would end up outside. And I decided that was a little bit too strange, so I backed off on that part of it. But one night, Xander and David they heard a noise and they come out of their bedroom, they're looking around the house, and they see an intruder in the hallway. And they follow the intruder around a corner, and the guy's gone. So they're looking around where he could possibly have gone, and they find a hidden doorway in the wall. So they open up the doorway, and it leads to stairs going up to a third floor that they didn't know they had. And when they go up there, they find a hallway full of doors on either side, like an old hotel hallway. And they start going into each of these doors. The doors lead to a little room called an antechamber, and each antechamber has items that, when taken as a whole, kind of make a theme. So there might be like a beach ball and a beach towel and some flip-flops, and that would be like a beach room. And they have that for all different sort of themes, like it could be an astronaut room or an alpine room, which would have like a parka and skis. And each room also has a door in it. And the door is always locked, so there's another door that goes through these little antechambers into the next room, but they can't get into that door. But they go through all these doors. There's 20 doors there. And as they're looking through them, they realize that the intruder's just not there. And in the last room, they're just kind of sitting there talking about what they found or not found. And Xander starts putting on some items. And the items in that room, they think would be kind of a high school play. It's like a helmet and a shield and a sword, some chainmail. And as Xander puts on the items, the door that's always been locked in each of the antechambers pops open. So they open it up, and there's sunlight streaming in, and kind of warm breeze comes in. And it's nighttime for them, and it's kind of cold where they are. So they know it's not leading to outside their house, but they don't know where it's leading to. So Xander decides he's going to step through it. And so he walks through the portal, or the door, and falls into some sand. And I'll read that part to you. Okay. Give me a yell if I load this while I'm talking and you can't hear me. This is where Xander steps through the door that they've just discovered. And there's two Latin phrases that you'll hear. One is sine missione, which means to the death. And the other one is morore honeste scolesta. And that means fight you pig. So this is what happens when Xander walks through. When Xander looked back, David was standing in the small room. He was holding the sword out in front of him. Then the portal rippled, and it simply vanished. Xander was lying in the sand. He saw that what had appeared to be mountains from the other side of the portal were the walls of a large stadium crowded with people. Scattered on the sandy stadium floor were more than 24 corpses. The sand itself took on a darker tint, as though a cloud had rolled over the sun. But Xander knew it was not hued by shadow, but by blood. The top level of the stadium was lined with ornate columns. Above them, wood poles held canvas awnings which flapped in the wind. He knew this place. It was the Roman Colosseum. But the crowd did not sit in the rooms he had seen in pictures. This Colosseum was new. Its surfaces were crisp and polished, throwing back the sun in 100 places. Xander pushed himself onto his knees, then stood. The tone of the crowd changed. From within the victorious rumble came a gasp of surprise. The crowd closest to him began an angry chant, Sine missione, Sine missione. They pointed at him, raised their hands, and pointed again, as if lashing at him with whips. The chant and whipping hands were picked up by more and more people, sweeping around the stadium in two directions. Sine missione, Sine missione. Xander followed his progression. As he turned, his eyes fell on the only other living person in the arena. The man was facing away from him. His arms were raised as he received an ovation of stomping feet and cheering voices. Flowers and petals rained down before him. One hand held a sword and the other a shield. He started back and forth, pumping his sword and shield into the air. The crowd continued to chant, Sine missione. The man spun around and spotted Xander. He lowered his arms. His head came up. tossed it back his shoulders, all of it the gladiatorial equivalent of a bull digging its hoof into the ground. Then he strode toward Xander. He thinks I'm an opponent, Xander realized. He held up his hands. Wait, hold on, this isn't what you think. I don't belong here. The gladiator was 30 yards away. He showed no signs of stopping. He began waving his sword in the air, then clanging it against his shield. The crowd roared. Xander backed away. He tripped over something. His cheek hit the dirt. A dead man stared at him from 2 feet away. The top of his head had taken a severe chop. Xander screamed and scrambled up. The gladiator was 15 yards from him now, moving fast. Wait, please, Xander said. The man yelled, Morore honeste scalesta. No, wait, what? Xander said. The gladiator was so close now, Xander could see the oily sweat that covered his body, the innumerable scars, the spattered blood from his victims. I'm just a kid, Xander cried. He turned and ran all out for the curving wall of the arena. He found a wooden door and pounded on it. Help, help! The thrumming of the crowd's voices changed and he spun around. He saw the gladiator charging at him, sword raised over his head. Xander dropped straight down. The man swung the blade. It thunked into the door. Xander darted out from under him. He felt a sandaled foot strike his thigh. He fell, kept moving, crawling in the dirt. He got to his feet and stayed low and shot away. His feet lost traction, but he dug in and ran. When he looked back, he saw the man was jogging toward him in practiced pace that conserved energy. Xander sprinted the length of the arena, dodging around bodies and severed limbs. Once again, he reached a large wooden door and pounded on it. He wondered how many of the dead men on the ground around him had done exactly the same thing. This wasn't going to work. Somehow, maybe with chained animals or legionnaires with razor-sharp blades, they'd shrink the area of combat until he had no choice but to face the gladiator. He ran to the nearest body, a boy not much older than himself. The wounds made Xander fall to his knees and vomit. His panic had kept his stomach from betraying him until now. Once he decided to defend himself, his mind became more rational, and any rational person would have puked at the sight. The crowd cheered with delight. Xander wiped his mouth on his bare forearm. He spat and crawled over to the body. It seemed that death had not relieved the boy from the desire to possess a weapon. His hand held firm to the handle of a mace. Xander pried his fingers open, feeling the stomach lurch again at the stiffness of the corpse's joints. He lifted the powerful weapon, which consisted of a stocky handle, a length of chain, and a heavy ball tricked out with spikes. He clambered up. His right arm was heavy and slow, weighed down by the chainmail and mace. He used both hands to lift the weapon. He hefted it and swung it to his left. The ball moved sluggishly, as though Xander were trying to fight underwater. He pulled the handle to the right. The ball swung with it. He had to throw his hips back to avoid being hit by his own weapon, but he thought he had figured something out. Once the ball was moving, it didn't want to stop. All Xander had to do was get it going and steer it. He pumped his arms as though stirring a vat of molasses. The ball swung out in front of him. It came back on his left side. When it arced out again, he pulled it toward his right. The gladiator watched, an amused smile bending his lips. He swung his sword, skillfully whipping it one way and then the other. It moved so fast the blade left gleaming arcs in the sand. The gladiator's smile vanished, and he rushed in. So that's that. That's what happens when Xander discovers, or Xander and David discover the portals. So what we find out is that each of these rooms leads to a time in history. Now, why these rooms are there, or why they lead to certain rooms or certain times in history, we find out later in the story. There's one thing that I'll give you a spoiler for the first book, just so I can tell you about a contest we have going on. We find out later that not only can people from the house go back into time, but people from time can come through the doors into the house. And toward the end of the story, or this book anyway, somebody does come through into the house and kidnaps Mom from the house back into time. And so now the kids have to find mom by going back into time and finding clues, finding out where she's been, why she's been there, try to get mom back out of time, or history, I guess. Now the contest is, if you send me a scene in which they go back into time and give me some details about what they find there, what they do there, why that particular time, and if it's something that I use, I'll give you an iPod Nano, and then also give you credit for that idea in the book. So in the acknowledgments part. So and what I found is that a lot of schools around the country maybe use the same curriculum, and so I get these waves of times in history where the kids are writing in and saying, oh, now they're going to feudal Japan, or they're going to Troy, or something. So if you're just studying something in history and it strikes you as something cool, just jot it down and send it to me. It doesn't have to be written the way I would write it in a book. It just has to be the idea. It could be bullet points, it could be anything. So, and you don't have to read books to do it. So if you have a paper in history or English and you have to write up something like that, just send it to me through my website. And if I choose it to write about it, then you win. So anyway, let's see. That's book number 3, book number 4, book number 5. Now this is not the cover of book number 6. This was an idea for the cover. And I didn't really like it. I thought that it looks like an alien or something coming through, or something. So I asked them to do something different. They did this one, and I thought that the figures were a little too blurry or a little too obscure. So they sharpened them and kind of made a door in the back. So I kind of like this one. And this one is actually after another change. Originally, all the characters looked like midgets, and I asked them to kind of make them more representative of the characters in the book. So it's supposed to be a 12-year-old, 15-year-old dad, mom, and a 9-year-old girl. It's not perfect, but it's better than a bunch of midgets. They didn't know if they wanted to go green, or red, or yellow, or kind of orangey color. So I put this on Facebook and just asked people what they wanted in Facebook, and pretty much it was an equal vote between the gold and the green. So we ended up going with this one, which is kind of a combination of the two. And this is the final cover for that one. And for a lot of people who've read the book, there's a family mascot in the story. Where the family draws this figure. They draw it on like cards and stuff. And then as they go back into time, they start drawing this on like trees and buildings to let mom know that they've been there. And they're afraid that if they just use English, that maybe she's in a time and a place that could be dangerous to her. And then she also starts drawing this back to them to let them know where that she's actually been there. And I've received a lot of emails from people who say that their family has taken on this symbol too, as kind of this little hive kind of guy. And one girl sent me this, and it's pretty cool. It's actually big. It's about that big, and it's kind of the Johnny Depp version of that character. He's got an earring, and it's got all these trinkets on the earrings that represent things from the book. So there's actually one of them. One of them is a Civil War bullet, and another one that looks like something from maybe a Monopoly game, and it represents the Titanic, because the Titanic is in the story. And in fact, I should let you know that the Titanic and another one, the first 2 contest winners. This is a contest that has been going on for a while, and it will continue as long as I keep writing the books. But the first 2 winners, the first one was, I think he was an 11-year-old boy, and he wrote in that Xander and David should be stuck in a castle during a Viking raid. So I wrote that into Timescape, and had them have to run from Vikings and from berserkers, or the Viking warriors, or crazy Viking warriors, I guess. And then the second one, which I also did in Timescape, was a girl who said that they should end up on the Titanic as it's sinking. So that was another thing that I put in the book, where they go through a portal and they find themselves on the deck of the Titanic while it's sinking. And Dad used to be a history teacher, so they know a lot about history. So they knew that there were only 11 minutes from the time it started listening to the time it sunk. So they knew that it was really, really a short time that they had to find a way out or off the Titanic without going in the water and freezing. So the situations like that, those are the kinds of things that I'm looking for on the contest. And really, if you write into me, give me as much detail as you can on the contest things. Because if I get a lot of one place, like 9/11 is a popular suggestion, the more detail that you give me and the more detail I can use would kind of make you more the winner. If I could use a lot of what you say, then that would make you the winner as opposed to somebody who just wrote 9/11. So after the Dreamhouse Kings, I mentioned earlier that I started writing a little bit more toward getting my faith more overtly into a story. And that's this book. This is the 13th Tribe. It's still got all the action, adventure, thriller aspects that I like to write, but really, I wanted to do something that was a little more faith-based. And this book sold, all of my books so far have sold either a producer or a studio in Hollywood. This one sold, I think, the fastest. Even though Comes a Horseman sold before it was published, this one somehow sold before I was even finished with it. And Leonardo DiCaprio has it right now. I don't know whether that means he's going to make it. It's all about money. It's all about timing. But this one sold probably for 2 words, the description of it: immortal vigilantes. And that's what this book is about. They became vigilantes. The part that I really like are the details behind it. They became vigilantes at the Golden Calf. They were actually part of the Israelites escaping from Pharaoh, and when they got to Mount Sinai or wherever it is, they started worshiping the golden calf, and as part of their punishment for doing that, they were cursed with immortality. And right after that, Phineas killed some sinners and was honored by God for doing that. And so they figured, oh look, well, that's the way to win back God's favor, so you could. It would be to kill sinners. So they decided to go through history, or through time, killing sinners until they earned God's favor again, which of course you can't do. But the central theme of the story is that anything done in darkness and in secret can often be twisted. And because they're immortal and because they're killing, that everything they do is in secret. So by the time the story starts in the present day, their good intentions have been twisted into really evil deeds. They kill at random, and then they find a reason for having killed. So it's kind of a sad story that this is a group of people who want God's favor, but they just don't know how to go about getting it. And it's about a security guard at an archaeological dig who finds out about this group and then realizes that they're planning to attack a major city. And he has to stop them before they do that. And let's see, this was the first cover that they had. And I thought this one looked like they were kind of partying at a concert. So I asked them not to do that one. And they went back to the first one I showed you. And then the book after that, this is a trilogy, is The Judgment Stone. The Judgment Stone is at that archaeological site where the security guard works. They find a piece of the first tablets of the Ten Commandments, the ones that Moses destroyed. And if you have possession of that piece, it strips away the veil between us and the spiritual world. So anybody who's in possession of that piece of the Ten Commandments can see angels and demons and kind of the spirituality of people. And a bad group of people get a hold of it and use it for bad intentions. So now they have to stop this group of people from using it for bad intentions. And that's the Digital Storm. I'm working right now on the third book in this series, which kind of continues that story. Let's see. This comes a Horseman in Czech. And when they buy the book for foreign language, they don't always buy the cover art because they have to pay extra for that. So that's their attempt at the eye from Comes a Horseman. I don't think they did a great job, but maybe it became a bestseller over there, so I guess it worked. This is Deadfall in Russian. And they don't have a word like Deadfall. I mean, our Deadfall is a tree that's fallen over, and that plays a part in kind of the resolution of the story. And it's also kind of a woodsy sound to it, and it all takes place in the woods, so which is why I like the title Deadfall. For them, they did a kind of a straight interpretation, and so it's called Crashing Tree. I have no idea why anybody would buy a book called Crashing Tree, but so that's the literal interpretation of the Russian version. This is House of Dark Shadows in Chinese, and in Turkish, Spanish. This is the Russian. Comes a Horseman, and the literal interpretation here is Attack of the Horses. So again, it became a bestseller, but I don't know why anybody would buy it. And they should have. I thought they, instead of having the wolf, they should have had like a horse howling or something. But, and then that's the Germ. Some of the translations are really odd. If you flip through the books, you'll see where some words just don't translate well, and they'll use the American. So there'll be just all this Russian language or German language or Italian language, and then just right in the middle of it, there'll be like ice cream or just some American word. And I don't know if you can see this. This is a proof page after they typeset the manuscript. It's already gone through editing. And they sent it to me to read for one last time, and I'll go changes to it. Now this is a page from House of Dark Shadows. At the very last moment, this is definitely the last moment to make any changes. The family has a dog named Cody. And I decided that with all the other activity going on in the story, that I would take the dog out of the story. And so the lines on the very bottom, the last paragraph there, that's taking the dog out. So every time there was a reference to a dog, I took it out. And I got them all except for one. So when you read the book, if you read the book, you'll find one spot where David says something like, "Oh, I hear Cody barking." And then Xander says, "He must be scared." It's the only time in the book that Cody's ever referenced or any dog is ever referenced. So, and the more amazing thing is that nobody's called me on it. I've received literally tens of thousands of emails about Dreamhouse Kings, and nobody has said, "Who's Cody? What's Cody? Well, why are we talking about a dog barking?" That's the only thing. So sometimes people just miss those things. And that's it. That's my story. Do you have any questions about publishing, about the books, about Hollywood, about anything? Yeah.
Why did you put the floor plan of the house in the front of all of this? Why did you make that?
Okay, why did I put the floor plan in front? I just felt that because there's a lot of moving around and running through the house, that it would help some people to be able to go back and look at it. At the there's a debate in publishing whether maps and floor plans like that are helpful, or if the author should just be more descriptive. I found, especially for middle school, they really like being able to flip back to it and know where the characters are in the story. And which keeps me honest too. I can't say they turned left if really there's no left there. And I've read stories where authors kind of cheat, and they're like, well, they turn left and they turn right and they turn left, and the kind of sound or the rhythm of that sentence is cool, but if you knew the layout, it wouldn't work. So it helped me stay honest. And when I write a story, I do that for myself. I make floor plans and I make maps. And so really all we did is we took what I did for myself and we just put it in there. And it's kind of like the Bob character, which was the cartoon face. That was for myself, and then I described it in the book, and then the editor said, oh, it'd be nice to see what he looks like. So he threw it in there. And I made him when I was in 5th grade, and his name was Don, which is my brother's name. But I didn't, when I realized I was going to publish it, I didn't want to insult my brother, so I named it Bob. Any other questions about publishing or writing life or anything? No, that's it. Yeah.
How complete is the story in your mind when you begin writing?
Very complete. The question is, how complete is the story in my mind before I start writing? Very, very complete. I really spend, I don't write every day. I do a lot of research, and then I spend a lot of time acting out who my characters are and kind of being my characters. And then when I sit down to write, I'll write 18, 19 hours a day. And just write, and I don't want to have to stop for figuring out what's going to happen next. Usually my characters will tell, I don't outline, because I want my characters to tell me where the story is going. But I do know the story in my head, but I don't write it down as you would normally think of an outline. Any other questions? Oh, there are some. Go over here now. How long does it take to write a book? So Horseman took about 1.5 years because I was still working my day job, which was writing magazine articles. When I started writing just novels, then it got down to about a year, and then about 9 months. And the Dreamhouse Kings took about between 4 months and 6 months each. Yeah, okay. There was some. Where am I? Oh, right here. Can the doors take you forward in time to the future? No. Probably, theoretically, they could, but I know where the future is for them. So if you want to send me a contest entry, don't do it about the future because I won't use it. I know where the future is, and I won't be able to use it because I know the future. So, and they don't have to meet anybody famous necessarily. They just have to be somewhere in time. So far, they've gone to the Viking that I told you, the Viking place, the Titanic, World War II, Civil War. They ran into Hannibal as he was crossing the Alps. Fun things like that. That's usually what I'm looking for. Any other questions? Oh. So, did I get
was that a part of that series, the Dreamhouse?
Just forgot about it? Yeah. Have I had an idea for a story and then forgot about it? I forget. No. Usually not. You know, a lot of writers will keep like a recorder or a notepad by their bed. You know, so when they wake up, they can write it down. My theory is if it was a really good idea, I won't forget it. And if it wasn't a great killer idea, then I should forget it. So yeah, I don't think I have, and I don't write them down. So I have written down phrases that I liked. You know, if a phrase comes to mind, I might write that down. Or if a character comes to mind, I might write that down. But usually, I don't write down ideas. Most young writers really hold on to their ideas, and everything's about the idea. I don't think it's about the idea. I think it's more about how you write the idea, how that's executed. So I think ideas are a dime a dozen, and it's your voice, it's the way you write it that counts. So when I write, I try to remember that the only thing I'm really bringing to the table, the only thing my publisher wants from me, and my reader wants from me, is not a great idea. You know, Immortal Vigilantes, Hollywood loves that, but really, if it wasn't that, it would be something else. Just ideas are just too common. Really cool ideas are common, I think. Are any of my books being made into movies? Yeah. Right now, well, it's hard to say. All of them have been sold to the movies. Dreamhouse Kings is at Universal Studios. They keep getting financing, and then the financing falls through. So they fly me out there. I meet a new cast of characters. Because it's mostly kids, the kids grow up. So, I mean, back in when we first started trying to make the movie, Logan Lerman was going to be Xander. He's the kid from the Percy Jackson movies. And then he got too old, and so then they got financing again. And so I had to go out and meet new kids. And then they had, about 3 years ago, there was a perfect David. And I was like, that is David. That's exactly how I pictured David. And now he's 16 or something like that, and he's too old. So I just, now when I talk to the kids, I'm like, I just hope they make the movie before you're old enough to play dad. Just really, the way it's going. Yeah, I'm going to start a new Dreamhouse Kings series. I'm working on book 7 now, and it's a continuation of the first series. So even though book 6 kind of wraps up the most important things, there are a few things that aren't wrapped up, and I really wanted to revisit that. And I keep getting letters from people asking for more. So I miss the characters. I really like the characters of the Dreamhouse Kings, so I wanted to revisit them. So I am writing a 7th book that I hope will be the first book of a new series. So we'll